I finally did it. Yo, Sheed, what did you just build? Oh, this whole thing? I just finished building my first small form factor PC. Do you know how long it took me to build this thing? I thought I had all the parts that I needed and everything was set to go, but when I got started, it took a turn for the worse. So recently I had this great idea to build my very first small form factor PC using one of my favorite cases that I've always seen online, the Fractal Terra. I really liked the idea of having something on my desk that was small yet so powerful and sleek, and since I've built a couple of PCs myself now, I thought, how hard could this be? So this face, what you're seeing right now, is Happy Sheed. This is about a month after building this PC. But during the build, whew, yeah, I was definitely going through it. And I just wanted to share my journey with you, the mistakes I made, what I learned, and how you can avoid the same headaches when building a small form factor PC for the first time. So if you don't already know what a small form factor PC is, it's pretty much as the name suggests, it's a full-fledged PC that fits inside a small case like this one. This is not to be confused with mini PCs though. Those are usually even smaller but less powerful and also less customizable. Now there are plenty of advantages to small form factor PCs, cool aesthetics, portability, but there's also some downsides like cooling, maybe a little bit of fan noise, and just how difficult it is to build or swap out parts. And that's exactly where the challenges came up during my process, but to be fair, this was my very first time, so someone with more experience or better prep would probably have had a much easier time than I did. But before you yell at me, I did do a bit of prep work for this build. Basically, I was inspired by this Reddit post with this build and case, and I looked at all of the parts that they used in their build, and I thought that I could use similar parts that I had laying around from a previous collab that I did, and buy whatever I didn't have. Now, I do want you to remember this little bit of context because it did lead to a couple of issues that I had. The first and most important part that I started with, and it's needed for pretty much any small form factor PC build, is the motherboard. Specifically, a Mini ITX motherboard. Mini ITX motherboards are much smaller and compact than standard ATX motherboards, but they also have fewer slots for things like RAM and PCIe. Luckily, I already had a Mini ITX motherboard from a previous build, which specifically was the Gigabyte B850i Aorus Pro. So I just removed it from my old build and started using that one. I also already had 2 sticks of 32GB DDR5 RAM from G.Skill and an AMD Ryzen 9800 X3D CPU, an SFX 850W power supply from Lian Li, a Samsung 2TB M.2 SSD, and an MSI RTX 5080 Ventus 3X GPU, which was the same exact GPU that the Reddit poster used in their build, so I thought that I would be good there. The only thing that I needed at this point was a different CPU cooler because the one that I had was a traditional style with a huge heatsink that was way too big for this case. What I ended up getting instead was the Noctua NHL12S low profile CPU cooler, which was also the same cooler that the Reddit user used in their post. As you can see, this one takes up a much smaller footprint and it would definitely fit inside the case. Or so I thought. This is where I ran into my first issue. When I read the guide online for the CPU fan cooler, I saw that it could be placed in different orientations, but only one of the orientations could work for it to be considered low profile, taking up the least amount of space. For the motherboard that I had, I actually couldn't fit the CPU cooler in this orientation because the IO shield was blocking the way. I tried to use it in a different orientation, but I could see immediately that it wasn't going to work. It was just too big to fit. At this moment, all of the joy and excitement immediately left my body. I knew that I would have to get a new motherboard, remove the CPU and all of the components, clean off the thermal paste, and start all over. Luckily, Noctua's website had a list of compatible motherboards for the low profile mode, so I looked at the list, found the new motherboard, the ASRock B650i, and I ordered it online, waited for it to come in, and then put all the components back together. So this is lesson number 1. Double check the size and compatibility for all of your components and case. Don't assume that things are just going to fit without knowing the exact measurements and how much clearance you may have. Even small things like the height of your RAM will definitely matter depending on what configuration and case that you decide to go with. And if you want to make things easy, you can definitely copy someone else's build on Reddit or PC Part Picker, but be sure to get the exact same parts. Don't assume. After finishing up assembling the motherboard, it was now time to start the actual build. I started reading the manual for the Fractal Terra and it was pretty straightforward, but I did get a little bit confused around the part adjusting the middle spine of the case depending on which configuration you were going for. I've never made a build with a PC case that had an adjustable spine. The numbers were labeled 1 to 7 I think, and after reading the manual for the configuration that I was going for, I needed the most GPU space, so it recommends setting the spine to I think 4. After my first mistake, I got really nervous because I was thinking that originally once I set it to this number, it would would be really hard to reconfigure if I did something wrong or I needed to change. Once I put all of the other parts in, I actually did end up having to adjust the spine slightly so that I could close the case without the component smacking against the frame. So for lesson number 2, I just want to remind you to take your time, read the manual for your small form factor PC case, and follow it closely. And if you need a little bit more visual help, you can always look up someone else's build with your specific case on YouTube. So even though adjusting the internal spine of this case was easy, I'll tell you what wasn't easy: cable management. I know that there are some folks out there like Dan Cam who love cable management, but honestly, I'm more of a as long as it fits, it's good enough type of guy. Most cases hide cables behind non-see-through panels anyway, right? And especially for this case, which doesn't have any glass panels, I just wanted to make sure that the cables fit properly. But man, that was easier said than done. As I started connecting wires to the motherboard, I could already get a sense that things were going to be tight, so I tried making as much space as possible for the other components. The PSU cables were by far the hardest because probably they were just the stock cables that came with the Lian Li power supply and were meant for a general use case. I definitely had to apply some force and squeeze in the power cable for the PSU because this orientation gave me the most room to work with internally. Luckily, the cables were pretty flexible, so with some elbow grease, I was able to squeeze everything in. Also, don't even get me started on trying to fit those tiny front I/O connectors to the motherboard. These cables are already so difficult to place when building a regular PC, but in a small one, it was 10 times worse. It took me like 10 or 15 minutes just to fit those cables into the motherboard, especially with my large hands. I really wish more cases started making these front panel connectors larger and easier to manage. So this is lesson number 3. Cable management is tough, so during your build, make sure to leave room for the bigger cables and plan accordingly. Connect the small and hard to reach cables first, and if you really want to make things easier, you could also look into getting some custom cables that are shorter or more flexible so that things fit better inside the case. Just make sure you double check the cable specs and get them from a reliable brand because you don't want your PC going up in flames. After plugging everything in, it was time for the moment of truth. Turning the PC on for the very first time. Whoa. As soon as I pressed the power button, I heard this really scary rattling noise, and honestly, I thought something was about to explode if I didn't act quickly. I shut off the power immediately by holding down the power button, and then I looked inside to see what was wrong. Things looked okay, and I didn't smell any burning or anything, but then I took a closer look at the bottom of the case where I placed the fan, and I noticed that the fan was really close to some of the wires. This was most likely causing the rattling noises. I tried spinning the fan blades with my hand and I saw that it was definitely hitting some of the wires, so I either needed to do some better cable management or find something to protect the fan blades. I did some research and learned about fan guards and learned that the micro center near me also had some, so I drove 10 minutes away, picked up the slimmest fan guard that I could find, came back home and just slotted it in. The fan guard fit pretty easily, and when I turned the PC on, no more rattling. Success. So lesson number 4 is kind of an extension of number 3. Be careful with your cable management and fan placement. Ensure that your fans have enough clearance to get air in and out and that the blades aren't hitting any of the other components. And if you need, use fan guards. Now, I wish I could say that this was the end of the video and everything else went really smooth, but sadly, I can't. Even though I didn't hear the rattling noise anymore, I also didn't see anything come up on the screen when I tried turning it on. I was honestly so tired at this point that I forgot to record this part, but I at least knew from experience why these things usually happen. Usually this means that something in the motherboard isn't inserted all the way. Unfortunately though, this ASRock motherboard didn't have those troubleshooting lights that some of them have, which are so helpful to find out what is the cause of your boot issue. So I ended up having to open the case, check all of the cables and components again, and make sure everything was inserted. And it ended up being the RAM that wasn't inserted all the way, so I just pushed it in a little bit more, heard a click, and we were good to go. I tried booting up the PC again, and it finally came up on the screen. So this is lesson number 5. Double check that all of your components are seated properly and maybe even do a boot test before putting everything inside the case, just so that you know everything works before you have to tear it apart again. Because with small form factor PC cases like this, it's just such a pain to have to take things apart and put them together again. So after going through all of the usual PC software setup process, like installing Windows, Discord, Steam, BIOS, some updates, it was finally time to start gaming. And here's some quick footage of the gaming performance on this PC, along with the CPU and GPU temps for cooling. Now, as you probably noticed from some of the clips in this video, this build stretched over the course of a few days to complete. But I will say most of that time was just waiting for some new parts. I'd say actually building the PC and troubleshooting took about 2 sessions of work, so maybe about 8 hours in total. Overall, this was by far the most challenging PC build that I've ever done, but if you ask me if it was worth it, I'd say heck yeah. I mean, just look at it. It looks great, runs great, and doesn't take up a lot of space on my desk. And honestly, I kinda like challenging myself and learning new things. So I highly doubt that this will be the last small form factor PC that I build, because there are just so many other cool cases out there too. So yeah, even after all the hurdles, I'm really proud about how this PC turned out. And if you're thinking about building a small form factor PC soon, hopefully my mistakes will help your build go a lot smoother.